The super tall skyscraper is just a few years away from its 100th birthday, and that's a pretty big deal. In 1928, work began on the Chrysler Building. It was the first man-made structure to soar more than 300 metres into the sky and claim super tall status. Since its construction, more than 170 super talls have risen across the world, and there are currently well over 100 more under construction. Now, we're finally beginning to see how these massive structures will eventually age. It's easy to forget when looking at such monoliths that buildings are not permanent things. After all, how many 200 or 300-year-old buildings do you know that are currently still standing and being occupied? The list isn't that long. Skyscrapers, like every other building, have a shelf life, and as we build more and more of these massive structures, it's worth asking how long that shelf life actually is. We already have some very tall, very old buildings that have stood for centuries. The 111-metre St Paul's Cathedral has dominated London's skyline for 347 years, and it remains intact and in use to this day. Arguably one of the world's first skyscrapers, the Great Pyramid of Giza, which has now eroded to a height of 139 metres, has been standing for 4,500 years. But could we ever expect a modern-day skyscraper to stand for millennia? Is that even possible? Well, surprisingly, the answer is maybe. In order for a building to survive that long, it has to battle two things: the limits of its materials and the elements. Now, to understand how that works in practice, we need to look at how some of our oldest and tallest skyscrapers are being kept upright today.
Structurally, most of them are likely to be safe, but we need to keep adapting them, keep using them flexibly in order to keep them.
To put it simply, they just don't build them like they used to. When the Empire State Building was being constructed back in the 1930s, engineers were still calculating everything by hand, so they overcompensated. Extra steel was added just in case, and as a result, the 92-year-old building is incredibly robust. Compared to a modern-day skyscraper like the Burj Khalifa, which is more than double the height of the Empire State Building, the Empire State weighs more than twice as much. In 1945, a small B-25 plane even crashed into the side of it, and the building was reopened in a matter of days. But this robustness wasn't a certainty. Not having enough real-life examples at the time, engineers feared the steel beams inside the building would not last more than 60 years if nothing was done to preserve them. Of course, the Empire State wasn't just left to erode into dust, and over its lifespan, it's undergone many different retrofits and operations to keep it upright. Starting in 2009, a decade-long retrofit costing more than $120 million gutted and replaced much of the building's internal pipes, gauges and heat exchange machines to make them more energy efficient. And more than $550 million was spent renovating the observation deck and public lobby areas. Retrofits like these are important to keeping the building in line with modern standards, but it's what the building is made of at its core that could really help keep it standing for centuries.
So the structure of a high-rise building is typically built from concrete, reinforcing steel, and structural steel as well. These are the big materials that we use to build those skyscrapers. If I break that down by kind of material, an example of concrete, for instance, is the Pantheon in Rome. That's almost 2,000 years old now. And it's the oldest concrete structure in the world. It's been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And there's no reason why we couldn't have that in our skyscrapers these days.
The skyscraper's steel skeleton is remarkably resistant. In fact, nearly all modern skyscrapers are made up of steel beams. These beams have a shelf life of about 100 years before needing to be replaced, and it's actually quite common for steel beams to be replaced piece by piece in old skyscrapers, especially in New York. As long as they're continually replaced, theoretically there's nothing stopping a building like the Empire State from lasting for centuries. Some engineers have argued that as long as there remain people to upgrade and improve these buildings, then skyscrapers could outlast the pyramids.
So when a skyscraper is in its planning stages, we absolutely talk about the design life of that building, how long it's built to last, what it's going to be used for in 50 years' time, in 100 years' time and beyond. The crux of the matter is that the structure of a high-rise building is essentially indefinite.
So if the materials are sturdy and easily repaired or replaced, that just leaves one enemy for the skyscraper to contend with: the elements. Modern-day super-tall skyscrapers now have the benefit of 100 years of engineering developments and breakthroughs. The Burj Khalifa's been designed to withstand hurricane-level winds that are predicted to occur just once every 2,000 years in the region. It's the building's sleek aerodynamic design that tricks the wind. Its stepped form reduces in size and tops out unevenly around a central spire. This deflects the air currents and prevents them from forming vortices that could shake the tower from side to side. Many tall buildings around the world employ this technique. The Shard uses jagged edges, the Willis Tower has a stepped profile, and the Petronas Towers taper to their summits. These modern-day structures are built to withstand centuries of battering by high winds, rain, earthquakes, and whatever else Mother Nature might hurl at them.
Earthquakes are extremely rare events, and extreme earthquakes are even rarer than the usual earthquakes that we're used to feeling. So we might design a building for an earthquake in one in every 2,500 years, for instance. And what's quite interesting now is that as we see the effects of climate change, as we see more storms, as we see higher winds, that we're able to transfer this performance-based approach from seismic design into these extreme weather events that we're starting to see.
But not every skyscraper is the Burj Khalifa or the Empire State. Rapid urbanisation around the world has created a second tier of skyscraper, one that won't be city-defining or icon-creating, but that's built purely to be functional and very, very tall. These buildings don't seem to have longevity in mind. They're built as quickly as possible for as many people as possible. So what happens to these buildings and how long will they last? To find out, we have to travel to the Chinese city of Shenzhen. It's exploded from a little-known fishing village with fewer than 30,000 people in the 1980s to a megacity that's now home to 12 million. This hub of innovation and ideas has become dubbed the country's Silicon Valley, and it's probably where your mobile phone was made. To accommodate such growth, a massive construction blitz had to occur, but that meant that some buildings were constructed quickly to meet the immediate needs of the city, without future-proofing in mind. Shenzhen is now left with some massive concrete structures that are nearing the end of their relatively short lifespans, and there's only two options left: demolition or regeneration. This 100-metre concrete tower has opted for regeneration and provides perhaps a blueprint for how these buildings could be dealt with in the future.
It is surprisingly recent, as it was completed in 1994 and came into use in 2002. So it is really emblematic of the first period of Shenzhen's explosive growth, let's say. So when we first visited it a couple of years ago, we saw an edifice which was either partially abandoned or in a heavy status of decay, let's say.
This is what the office building looked like, and this is what it will soon become, the Shenzhen Women and Children's Center.
The building, I think, is representative of the time when it was built. So it was in this very first rapid growth of the city. And so I don't think possibly at that moment enough attention was paid to the needs of a building that needs to serve women and children specifically, and the public at large.
Instead of a costly and potentially wasteful demolition process, the building's core is going to be preserved and reused, finding new life and a new purpose.
So retaining and refurbishing a building is more sustainable than demolishing it and building anew. We are happy to be part of such a process, which is so different from what usually happens in China. Just for knowledge, we were able to salvage 80% of the original concrete structure, which amounts to approximately 24,000 cubic meters.
As Shenzhen continues to expand, there isn't room for these old buildings to sit there and become disused. Space is valuable, and many in the city are looking to this project as a case study.
We will see, for sure, more large-scale retrofitting of high-rises in the future. It is inevitable that many of the high-rises that were quickly built over the past 30-40 years around the world, and particularly in China, will need a refurbishment over the next 10-20 years. So replacing all of them with newer buildings will not be always an option, and in most cases will not be a sensible and sustainable option. So I think we need to think in different terms about existing contemporary architecture as less disposable and more recyclable.
Skyscrapers are ultimately highly functional buildings. They create huge amounts of space on small urban sites. We build them to house us, shelter us, and give us a place of work. Every skyscraper in the world has a purpose, and we'll continue repairing and maintaining them as long as that remains true.
So if a structure is properly maintained, properly inspected, properly surveyed, there's no reason why the structure of a building couldn't last for many hundreds of years. So what's really interesting is that in the past 12 years, we've built more skyscrapers than the rest of human history combined. So we have a huge stock of tall buildings that are being used well today, but will need to be adapted and will need to be retrofitted, extended, and changed over time so that we can keep them, use them flexibly, and maintain their long life.
Will we ever see a 500-year-old skyscraper? Well, probably yes. These buildings will continue standing as long as we need them to. If you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more about where construction is headed, make sure you're subscribed to tomorrow's build.